Okay, this will be a short video where we focus on the third group of plants, which are the Gymnosperms. And this group, as you see here, includes conifers, or those cone-bearing trees, and also something called cycads. And what gymnosperm actually means is naked seeds, and that's essentially what a cone is. So as we mentioned when we talked about the non-vascular plants, that they were the only group that had the gametophyte generation as the dominant generation. So gymnosperms then are going to have their dominant generation as the sporophyte. Even though they have naked seeds, so this group is the first group that we see the presence of a seed. Remember, the ferns had vascular tissue, but they did not have seeds. Instead, they still had spores as their mode of reproduction. So in this case, we have pollen, and the pollen grains are going to contain the male sperm, and pollination is going to occur by wind. So if you look at the picture, what you can see is that in this particular pine tree, we have two different types of cones. We have female cones, and we also have male cones. And typically the way that this would work is your female cones are going to be present higher up in the branches, and the male cones lower. And as the wind blows, it would blow some of the pollen from the male cones to the female cones. Now, this tree then is what we call heterosporous, meaning that we have two different types of spores that develop into the male and female gametes. So the megaspore, is the female variety, and it develops into a gametophyte that's going to house the egg. And if you look at the cone there, every scale on this cone is actually going to have two different ovules for every scale. Now, the microspores are what are developed in the male cone, and these eventually develop into pollen grains. Now, if we look toward the bottom of the figure, you can see one scale there that's magnified for you. So this would be a scale from the female cone. And you see that when the pollen grain lands on the female cone, the first thing that happens is the development of a pollen tube, and that pollen tube grows down to access the ovule so that the sperm can fuse with the egg and form the new zygote. Eventually, when that happens, then what you have is you have the embryo, which is just the fusion of the egg and sperm, but you also have the protection there by the female gametophyte, which makes up part of the seed. Now, this, especially in a pine tree, this process can take quite a long time, up to 2 years, once the pollen grain has landed on the female cone. And as I mentioned, the gymnosperms are not only the conifers, what we would think of as, evergreen trees like pine trees. So certainly it includes those, but it also includes this type of plant on the right called a cycad, and you can see that it also is a cone-bearing plant. Now, I wanted to show you the picture on the left because I wanted you to see what an example of a seed looks like from a pine tree. So as I mentioned, each scale from the female cone has 2 ovules, and those thinner looking things on the left, on the bottom, are actually what the seeds would look like from a fertilized female cone. So those seeds then, as you can tell, will be pretty light, and the wind can blow those, and then they would drop, and if they fell into a place with soil and it got water and sunlight, then we would see the development of a new pine tree, or whatever kind of tree it was. So that is really what you need to know about gymnosperms. So in summary, how do they differ from ferns? Well, the big thing is they have seeds, right? And specifically, their seeds are a type of cone. And we will talk next about the fourth and final group of plants, the angiosperms.